Vayaska. Welcome him, please.
Thank you, Jane. The acoustic here is not fantastic, but I will be extremely brief because, as Jane mentioned, we'll have to all move out of this building at some point, and I feel that we might run out of time for the last presentation of the day. So we need to bear in mind that as a courtesy to the last presenters that we should try to run this whole proceeding on time. I'm just going to very simply outline the objective of this symposium. There are two main objectives, which is fundamentally to reflect on space, but there are two ways we're going to do this. One is to have guest speakers like David, who will present papers on projects that can be that are somehow related to the kind of philosophy and curatorial approach of space. So we can, if you like, contextualize space in a broader landscape of similar initiatives and projects. The other objective is to actually reflect on the individual projects, some of the individual projects. This will be very useful for us also in terms of planning for the next space, because space is the structure, organizational structure of space is an experimental one that is constantly reviewing what we're doing while maintaining the overall philosophy of our program. What I'm simply going to do is just to clarify what we've been trying to do. I'll just outline our main aim and objective, so it's as clear for everyone. So Space and IASCA program aims to experiment with new modes of interaction between contemporary art and non-specialist audiences, to focus on artistic practices that straddle the boundary of art, social activism, science, design and architecture, to commission the creation of new works that result from a protracted engagement with local social contexts, to create a new type of international art event as an alternative to traditional art biennials that often have little or no relation to the places in which they are held, to facilitate the creation of artwork that strike a balance between situation specificity and gallery display, to implement a collegial organizational and management structure involving the participation of a network of partner organizations, to provide regional organization and artists with an opportunity for professional development, and to offer a mentoring educational opportunity for regional schools, students and young people. So that's fundamentally what our objectives are. And so we'll just review together what we have achieved, what we haven't achieved, and how we can plan things for the next one. Thank you everyone for coming, and I'll leave you in the capable hands of David Cross, but you'll introduce David. Thank you.
So, here we have David Cross. David Cross is an artist, writer and curator based in Wellington, New Zealand. He's exhibited in a range of venues in New Zealand, Australia and Eastern Europe, including the Art Gallery of Western Australia, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne, and international live art festivals in Poland, Croatia and the Czech Republic. His writings have been published in numerous journals and magazines, including Art and Text, World Art, the AAA and Z, Journal and Photograph Art. David is Associate Professor in Fine Arts at Massey University, where he directs the Litmus Research Initiative, and with Claire Doherty co-directed the one-day sculpture series of 20 temporary commissions by national and international artists across New Zealand in 2008-9. And in 2011, he curated Iteration Again in Tasmania, a public art project featuring 22 Australian and international artists. Someone to be reckoned with. Welcome him, please, David.
Thanks, Jan. I don't know if my mic's on. Do I need to talk into this and have my lapel mic? I do, okay. Double trouble. All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Lovely to be here. It's my first trip to Perth, so it's really wonderful to engage and also to see the space project, which was really fabulous. I was going to talk about the project that I just did in Tasmania last year, but I decided to shift gears, partly because I had a conversation with Marco in Canberra last year, and we're talking about how a lot of these kind of conferences on public art, we kind of talk about Monsier and Badiou and spatial theory. What we often kind of don't talk about are the minutiae, the logistical issues that, to our minds, really, in fact, inflect a lot of the meanings of temporary public artwork. So what I've decided to do today is to talk to you about one project that I did a little while ago with, in conjunction with Kerr Doherty, who's a curator and the Director of Situations in the UK. And together we worked on a project in New Zealand called One Day Sculpture, which was 26 artists and 20 projects across 5 cities in New Zealand in 2008-2009. I've talked about that project a lot. In fact, I'm deeply full of inertia at the thought of talking about it again, except that I'm going to drill at it in a different way, which is to choose one project and really try and get at the logistics of what happened. And it's, of course, an absurd and ridiculous saga, as is always the case with these temporary public artworks. So, without further ado, the work in question is called Journée de Barricade by English-based artists Ivan and Heather Morrison. It took place on December the 14th, 2008 in Stout Street, Wellington. Okay. So we might frame works such as these temporary public artworks through the rubrics of place, time, cultural specificity, alterity, materiality, and of course the public sphere. But rarely had we heard discussions that framed the minutiae of processual organisation in terms of what we might call front and centre issues. So rather than talk about the bigger pictures, as I've just articulated, I want to drill down and talk in specific around the ideas of agony and ecstasy, of logistics, chance and negotiation in relation to temporary public art. So the project I'm going to discuss, Ivan and Heather Morrison's Journée de Barricade, developed as one of 20 of the One Day Sculpture projects across 2008-09. And in this particular example of the work, it happened fairly early in the project. So just to give you an idea that it happened across the course of a year, and they all happened on a separate day in a different part of New Zealand. So it's not like they all happened at the same time. It was like a cumulative project that kind of evolved over time across the course of the year. There is at the heart of every temporary public art project a consistent and evolving adrenaline rush, equal parts terror and excitement, that builds to varying degrees the closer you get to D-Day. Of course, it's the nature of things that the greater the challenge, the bigger the buzz. What this means is that an insane level of risk is built into the project, and the fundamental challenge eating at you 24/7 is how to keep the risk at an achievable or livable level. Let me outline the challenge in this instance. Develop a huge barricade made out of car and truck wrecks and 50 tonnes of assorted rubbish that blocks off a busy street in Wellington the week before Christmas. Do so without the presence of the artists on the ground or with the benefit of a research visit until 2 weeks before the project is to take place. Do so with my co-curator firmly ensconced at all times in Bristol. Allocate funding of no more than 10,000 New Zealand dollars, and let me tell you folks, not worth a lot in terms of Australian dollars, to the production of the work, including staffing, equipment hire, cartage, etc. Install the work from scratch over the course of one night and then remove every scrap of it the following night. Allow 4 months in total in scoping, planning and realising the work. Set the date and advertise it months in advance so we cannot change it for whatever reason without being a huge pain in the arse. Okay. Seems like a suitably cardiac-inducing set of operating principles, possibly enhanced by the fact that this one commission was only one of 6 that we're doing across the 6-month spectrum. Just to give you an idea, Litmus, which is the organisation that I lead, did 6 of the projects and 14 of the others were done by other institutions in the country. So clearly a risk assessor would shut down the operation instantly, though at a certain time a kind of level of hubris and naivety seemed to camouflage this. So here's what happened, finding a site. The artists outlined what sort of barricade they wanted and roughly the type of site they wanted to intervene in. Funnily enough, this involved the most public, visible, traffic-congested intersection in Wellington. They sent a mock-up picture. This is the intersection here. It doesn't look like State Highway 1, but it is, folks, in New Zealand. So They sent that picture over, and they said, can you kind of do something like this? Just to give you a context of my operating team, myself as the curator, a very young, inexperienced production manager, and then an assortment of teams of assistants and volunteers. So we, my young and unflappable project manager, set about gaining permission from the council authorities to blockade a major intersection the Monday before Christmas. First thing that we did was to approach the Wellington Public Art Manager with the brief. He outlines the points of difficulty, which are in no particular order of importance: roading authorities, affected business owners in the vicinity, public transport issues, health and safety notifications, and that's just the beginning of it. It looks onerous, but our man in council thinks it can be done. He'll set up discussions with roading, and we should begin liaising with businesses. Before we make it out the door, another email appears that ups the ante. The street, Vivian Street, is actually State Highway 1, as I mentioned, and thus the remit of the national government and not council. Though, of course, council still has to make decisions as well. The government needs 3 months' notice to make an application, and we have 3 months and 2 days. Flurry of emails and feasibility discussion, and we, artists and team, decide to activate Plan B. Goodbye, Plan A. Plan B. The artists, using a primitive version of Google Maps, identify Civic Square as a possible site, and we investigate blockading all of the entrances to it, which includes council chambers, the City Art Gallery and the Wellington Library. The problem is that it has 5 entrances, and we'd need to barricade all of them. And it's not really a major thoroughfare, which was really what they were interested in doing. There was also the issue of a previous artwork that tried to do something similar in the main entrance a few years before. Artists reluctantly agreed to cease and desist on this option, and we moved to Plan C. After spending 3 weeks scoping out road sites and fully absorbing the artist's intentions, we discover what we think is the ideal site. It's a major intersection, not State Highway 1. It has only one bus route on it that runs infrequently and does not have overhead wires, because in Wellington all of the buses have trolley wires, overhead wires. We call our man in council who thinks we might have it sorted. He arranges for the council roading guy to meet us the next day to come and check it out. The council roading guy, let's call him Barry, begins by telling us what an adventurous project we're proposing and how it would be a really great thing for Wellington, before applying the brakes on our enthusiasm. The site is unsuitable, traffic cannot be rerouted, and the public transport issue is irresolvable. He'd like to help, but the site is not practical. We retreat to ponder what to do and inform the artist Plan C is not a goer, artists getting increasingly agitated, and 5 weeks to D-Day. Plan D. More walking through the city looking for what appears to be a non-existent site. It has to be busy, lots of traffic, no public transport, and not a swag that businesses to placate in closing off their street the week before Christmas. For the first time, we canvassed the idea of shelving the work entirely and getting the artist to start an entirely new commission, when our man in council calls and says he thinks he's found the site. We drop everything and head down there to what is the shopping precinct of Wellington, and amazingly the site does cover all the criteria. So we ask our friend Barry to come back down and give us his thoughts on the site. Barry arrives, but this time there is no messages of couch support. He's straight into the negatives. The station's nearby, we cannot impede pedestrian flow. When we point out that the pedestrians could take a different route to the station, he blows his cover. My job, says Barry, is to ensure the safe and unimpeded traffic flow through this city. What you're proposing runs counter to my jurisdiction. But it's only for one day, Barry. Chill out, mate. This is going to be a really great project. No response. It is only now clear that he has been stringing us along and actually hates the entire premise of the work and is working to ensure it doesn't happen at all. It is also clear that although we have every councillor and Lord Mayor on side, that we need Barry to sign off on the project. By this time, it's 3 weeks before the work is scheduled to take place, and the artists are arriving in 2 days. More than a month of negotiations and lobbying has come to nothing, and I would happily, delightedly, make a dent in Barry's moustache. For some reason, I canvassed the possibility of a date change, which seems completely irrelevant to the sticking point. What about it if we do it on a Sunday instead of a Monday, Barry? And amazingly, and with a completely straight face, Barry says, yeah, that's fine. Barry could have said this all along at any time, and it would have saved 4 months of UN-style diplomacy. But you see, as far as Barry was concerned, he won the battle. Of course, he wasn't going to tell us that the issue that was non-negotiable was the 9 to 5 Monday aspect of the work. All right, so we've got our site, and it's here. How to make a barricade a city with lots of junk in the middle of the night and what might go wrong. Okay. With the artists finally on the ground, permission granted for the use of the site, the next challenge was to convince a different department in council it would be a really great idea to have 2 trucks and drivers and a refuse manager available to transport the junk from dusk till dawn, Saturday night, Sunday morning and Monday morning. We needed to convince them not only that this was a good idea, but they should do it for next to nothing. The manager of this department, let's call him Colin, was the same vintage as Barry with a slightly more no-nonsense manner. I felt an extraordinary sense of trepidation outlining what we wanted to do and why. Colin listened to my 5-minute sales pitch and his facial expression did not change at any time, creating for me a very deep sense of inertia. Even as I was beginning to think that this was utter madness, Colin responded to my pitch by asking, what time do you need the trucks and what needs to be removed? We've only got 2 trucks, you can have those, but we have no one available to supervise and I'll do that. The meeting was over in less than 2 minutes with a big tick from my friend Colin. With the rubbish resolved, all we needed were the car, bus and truck wrecks plus bundles of compressed recycled paper sourced and transported to get them on and off site as per the rubbish. Ivan Morrison found a wrecked blue bus that he loved and he was adamant that we needed it to be hired and towed from a paddock in the boondocks of Wellington. Its axle was kaput and the towing was extremely complex, but it was part of the work, so we made that happen. Finally, a forklift driver needed to be sourced to lift the cars into position, and a team of 15 volunteers drafted into action and were ready to sign off with city engineers. Okay, here's the appropriate time to outline that Wellington is the windiest city in the world, and that December is notorious as the ultimately worst month for evil gales. What we were proposing was to have assorted, potentially deadly flying objects positioned on an 8-metre high barricade. The engineer began by saying, of course, every piece of this object will be tied down, to which we, of course, said, it definitely will, having not actually thought of that at the time. And with an almost cavalier lack of thoroughness beyond wind protection, the engineer signed off and everything was now in place. So we get to the actual week itself. The week leading up to December 13 is frightful. Horizontal rain, wind as per usual, and negligible sunshine. We go throughout our risk planning again and try and figure out if we can actually make this work if the weather is not good. Thanks to Barry, and to be fair, our curatorial premise, we have no rain days, so there's no flexibility. It's in the hands of the gods. The forecast is for rain, and the wind described as moderate. Saturday morning begins with drizzle and wind, which turns to just drizzle, which peters out around 3 p.m. There's no sun, but neither is it raining. It is, however, gusty. Then the sun comes out at 7 p.m. just as the 2 teams begin heading into position and the road diversion signs are put in place. At the same time, and for most of the time that we can remember all of the week, the wind drops completely, and it's completely still. We know this because the wild goats that surround the landfill, as we start to load the skips, sound like they're mic'd up to a PA. We laugh for the next 2 hours, filling our skip after skip with the sound of 400 goats bleating behind us. Okay, so installation of the work began at 9 o'clock on Saturday night, and as you can see here in these pictures, this is the dump team. There was 2 teams. One team was loading up skips with the rubbish. The other team was on site with forklifts and cranes and lights building the project. We had to barricade pretty much the whole vicinity to make sure nobody could see it. It took us 8.5 hours. We began by putting the armatures in place and locking them in. Those trucks were locked into place. And then once we finished locking them in place, we dressed it with all of the detritus and rubbish, which took us about 6 hours through the night. By the time we got to about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, everyone was absolutely spent. But again, we just managed to get the task completed as the sun came up. And it was really crucial that we were off-site as the sun came up. So literally, as the sun is coming up, we're packing up, we're cleaning up, and we're out. So when people arrived Sunday morning to walk along the street, they saw that. Some beautiful stories, of course. One woman, businesswoman, tried to actually go straight over the top. She took her heels off and was most put out when I suggested it might have been a health and safety issue. The work was in that position for 9 hours until the sun went down. We all went home to sleep. And I can remember the last thought that I had as I put my head on the pillow while our daughter was watching the Wiggles was we forgot to tie the fucking thing down. No wind, no rain, perfect sunshine for the entire day. Then, at exactly 9 o'clock, we dismantled the whole thing. We removed absolutely every single piece of the work until the street was completely clean. And then at 5:30 in the morning, just as the last street sweeper went through, it started to rain and it washed away all the detritus. It's just phenomenal. All right. So, issues of a small but significant nature. Yes, getting permission to do it makes it insanely difficult, but to do it, and more to the point, to do it as a challenging intervention is part of the work. Gaining permission to do anything that takes both a lot of time and no time at all, depending on the circumstances. Having the council fund a project often, but not always, helps to smooth the process. Pretending you do not quite know what you're doing can be helpful, as it brings out the fatherly instinct in some people. Or it can be very unhelpful if the person you're trying to convince is a diligent, risk-focused public servant. Pretending you are blue-collar and blokey works a lot more than it should in the year 2008. And never give up unless they take away the keys from you. All right, thank you.